This is a true crime story about how debt and greed can ruin your life, even if you and your partner are police officers. Before we get into the story, let me just say I'm Harley. This is all I'm saying is, here we tell true crime stories with the occasional stranger fiction story chucked in. Disclaimers are a must before we start, as always. It is a true crime. Therefore, it involves real people, and these real people have real families. So although I do want you to share it, and I do want you to comment, please be a bit sensitive while you do so. And before we start, I do just want to say, this story is a lot about their finances. And I know that there's going to be a few people that are uncomfortable with that and say that their finances have got absolutely nothing to do with us. And I do agree, usually. Other people's finances and what they do with their money is absolutely nothing to do with us. However, it does play a massive part of this story. It is the main part of this story. So therefore, I do need to explain their finances, and I do go into a bit of detail, especially towards the end of discussing that section. This story is about a perfectly married couple, a happy family. Both the parents worked for the police, and they did have 3 children. But the children aren't totally necessary to the story, so to protect them, I'm going to leave them completely out of it. Let's face it, they've been through enough. Leanne Mckie was 39 years old. She was kind, loving, generous, a wonderful daughter and a wonderful mother. As well as being the mother of 3 children, she also worked for Greater Manchester Police. She'd been working there since 2001. She was a detective constable and she worked on the police force's sexual offences unit. The chief constable said she worked tirelessly to provide support and get justice for victims. 4 years her senior, Darren Mckie, was her husband. He was 43-year-old, and to quote, he was a rising star. He was a police inspector for the Greater Manchester Police. He'd been with the force for 21 years. During those years, he'd been nicknamed Spock, and that was due to the lack of empathy that he shared. This story were about as long as I wanted it, so I didn't look too much into him, but it is said that he was a karate enthusiast. I didn't see anything else to back that up, but it is said that he's a karate enthusiast. Leanne and Darren had been married for 13 years, and for all intents and purposes, from the outside, the marriage was perfect. They had the perfect family, the perfect marriage, all was going well for them. They were both doing really well in their careers as well, and especially Darren, as I've just said, he had just been recently promoted to inspector. They both had loving and supportive parents that cared and they were generous. They'd helped out over the years not only financially, but they'd helped out by looking after their grandchildren whenever asked. But in private, Darren and Leanne's relationship had a lot of hidden cracks. And over the years, these cracks were just getting bigger and deeper. Now, it is important to say that some people in life just aren't good at money management. It doesn't matter how much money you give them or how often you give it them, they will always end up in debt. And what I mean is, obviously, there are people in this country and around the world that simply don't have enough money. But then there's others that do have enough money, or even if they did have enough money, would still end up in debt because they just don't know how to spend it. They always want that little bit more, and they're always spending out of their means. And it turns out the Mackies, especially Darren, weren't really good at money management. In the past, between Darren's and Leanne's parents, they've been gifted £91,000. That money went to improving their previous house, doing some renovation work and stuff, and it also went to pay off a £40,000 debt that they had. However, when they sold that previous house in September 2016, they'd already built up a similar debt. But fortunately for them, for all the work they'd done on their house, it did increase the house's value, so when they sold the house, it did pay off all the debt. And then on top of that, I think they had £149,000 spare. But obviously that weren't spare, it did go towards paying for their new house. So now for the second time, the pair are debt free. But what did I just say? Certain people will always end up back in debt. When they moved into this new house, which we'd got a mortgage for, but we're not really including that as part of the debt. When they moved into this new house, the judge claimed their spending was out of control. They were living well beyond their means, and they were attempting to match the millionaire lifestyle that the neighbours in this super rich suburb had. They were trying to compete and trying to fit in. They lived in Wilmslow. Now, I did look up the house and the street that they live on, and in that area, for a 3-bedroomed house, you're looking at about £500,000, £500,000. And that's like the bottom end. So for a 3-bed house, you're paying anywhere between £500,000 up to closer to £1 million. But they didn't buy a 3-bed, they bought a 4-bed. So obviously that's some more money. And the only reason I chose to get the price of a 3-bed is, one, I thought it'd be a bit more relatable to the local area house prices, and I didn't want to make a random guess or suggest how much the house were. I do think I read somewhere that it was something like 600 grand, but that's irrelevant. Like I said, we're not taking the mortgage into account. It turns out that although Leanne probably knew there were a bit of debt, she weren't anywhere near as familiar with how much debt they had as Darren were. And she must have known there were some debt, because the amount of money they were spending, there is no way that she couldn't have been suspicious. And if she weren't, she was very naive to how much things cost. And here's why I say that. In court, the jury was told that in the few months that they had this house, they'd spent £63,000 on renovations. And this is also something the judge talked about. And he went on to say that, alright, the house needed a bit of renovation work, but it didn't need anywhere near as much as they were doing, nor did it all need doing at once. So basically, they're getting in massive debt because they're rushing to do it, and they're doing it in a style and getting really luxurious things that are well out of their means. The judge did give a few examples of this, and the example I've chose to give is the kitchen worktop that they chose was a granite worktop, and that cost £3,570 just for a kitchen worktop. Now, if you're having a new kitchen and you pay that and you're earning a lot of money, fair enough. But while you're having the entire house renovated at the same time, before you've even moved into it, it's a bit costly and a bit extreme. Not only was it a bit impractical for them to be paying the mortgage on this house and paying for this ridiculously expensive renovation work, but during the 6 months that the house was being renovated, they were renting somewhere else to live. And that place that they were living was costing just shy, and I mean like a couple of pounds shy, of £1,500 a month. Quick math, that's £9,000 just for somewhere to live while their house was being renovated. So now on this new start in this new house, their expenditure is massively over, really shadowing their income. It was reported that when they'd moved into this house, their income together was £68,000. He were earning £51,000 and Leanne were earning £16,500 because she only worked 2 days a week. That means they spent just over a year's worth of income just on renovating the house. And that's before taking into the account the £9,000 for the other house, and the mortgage, and the day-to-day expenses. That is just on renovating the house alone, 1 year's worth of income, no bills included. So then you think, well, they've spent a year's worth of income without food or rent or mortgage, just on renovation work, they're going to be taking life a bit more seriously and a bit more sensibly. But that wasn't the case. The judge said it was £6,000, but newspapers claimed £4,500. Either which way, they went on a nice luxurious family holiday to Portugal. While living well out of their means, they were in debt by £115,000. And Darren's response to this, Darren's answer to this, was to apply for more loans. In November 2016, there'd apparently been a lot of messages passed between Darren and Leanne, which showed how much all of this were weighing onto their relationship. If nothing else, their trust was at an all-time low. But things were only getting worse. In the summer of 2017, Darren's now really struggling to keep up with his lifestyle. He's making numerous amounts of applications for loans to get him out of the financial mess they're in, which by the way is never the right answer. Do not get into more debt to fill up the debt. It just don't work. By the end of autumn 2017, they was in an absolute serious mess. Their overdraft was massively overdrawn. That's an overdraft on their shared bank account. But Darren was telling Leanne, because she was worrying, look, it's okay, it's all in hand, it's all under control, I've got it, don't worry about it. But as you can imagine, this weren't true. And now that Darren's telling Leanne that it's all sorted, he's even more desperate to find an answer. So he's still applying online for more loans from different companies, and they're all being declined. No doubt because of the financial state they're in. On the 31st of August 2017, Darren applied to borrow £10,000 from a loan company. The loan was unsecured and just in his name, and again it was declined. Needless to say, Leanne knew nothing about it. But when the letter came to tell him that it had been declined and he couldn't have the loan, Leanne was at home and she opened it. She immediately emailed Darren and was like, what the hell, why are you applying for more loans? What's going on? And he just kind of like went, look, it weren't me. I ain't got a clue what it is. And then in a panic, in like a mode to get her to trust him, he says, oh, well, it must have been fraudulent. Somebody must have applied for it in my name. So obviously Leanne's concerned and she needs to get to the bottom of it as soon as possible. So she takes it upon herself to phone the loan company. Obviously they treat it as a fraudulent case of impersonation and they send Darren a letter about it. But this time Darren's a bit wise to what's happening and he makes sure he's at home to intercept the letter before Leanne can open it. And we know that's definitely true because that letter was found in his office after the main incident. But again, even though he denied it and outright claimed that, and then actually started an investigation case about it in regards to the company, but again, just because he's lied about that doesn't mean they're not in a financial ruin. So on the same day that Leanne found that letter, the 31st of August 2017, Darren made some more applications. The main application was for £54,000. This time, the loan was against the house. And as you'd expect, Leanne didn't know anything about this loan. So then you're probably wondering, well, if she didn't know about the loan, how could he possibly take a loan out against the house? And you're right, it did have to be a joint loan. And he spent a lot of time on the phone with the loan broker, and eventually the loan were approved pending on the completion of necessary application forms and the provision of supporting documents. Some of them documents included Leanne's payslips and Darren's payslips. Out of pure desperation, Darren knew what he had to do. He forged Leanne's signature on the forms and sent them back. He also took advantage of his situation as a police officer and he misused the police's computer system to get copies of her payslip. He then lied to Leanne and tricked her, and by doing so he got her login details for the computer. He went on and stole whatever other supporting documents he needed. But that weren't the end of this bizarre episode. He even created a fake email for Leanne, so when the broker emailed him, he could intercept it. And Leanne had not too long ago got a new phone. Her old phone and her old SIM card was in his desk, so he used that phone number so that if he tried to correspond with her, again, he could intercept it. But there was one more thing that the loan company needed, and obviously that was Darren and Leanne's passports. They needed proof of identity. But I mean, out of everything else, that's the easiest thing to get. He knows they're not going on holiday anytime soon. He knows that she's got a driving license if she needs ID. So he simply just gets out of the drawer and sends it off. All well and good, job's a good one. But on the 28th of September, they were returned by special delivery from the loan company, along with her salary details and all the other supporting documents they needed. Leanne received and signed for the package, and then she opened it, being a bit curious to what had been signed for. Obviously, she was absolutely mortified that this loan application, her payslips, her passport, and the application was being signed by her signature had just returned to the house. She didn't apply for no loan. She didn't sign it. Why do they even need a £54,000 loan? At this time, Darren was at work. Leanne was also working later on. She started an 8-hour shift at 3 p.m. She immediately texts Darren saying, I've just received his package. You're a liar. I want to know what's going on. One of the texts read, you liar. Just got back a loan application with my passport and my name. WTF. Another one read, I asked you and you promised. Fluent Finances? Who are they? Are we in such a mess? Why again? The kids need clothes and shoes. What's going on? Darren, in complete cowardice, were ignoring her. Maybe he were busy, maybe he were just trying to think of what he could do. Then at 11:30, 32 minutes past to be precise, he did reply. He texted her to say that he was coming home, and then he did. He left work early and went home. He'd been planning to go home early anyway, because he had to meet the surveyors who were coming to value the house at 1:30. But within an hour of him leaving the office, Darren Mckie had killed his wife, Leanne Mckie. It's unclear exactly what happened in the house, but Darren had been heard banging drawers and vacuuming in the kitchen, and from a pathologist report, it's quite clear what happened to Leanne. She'd been strangled to death. By doing so, Darren had fractured 2 of the structural bones in her throat, as well as causing extensive bruising. The pathologist said that the force used was equivalent to a karate chop, which I don't quite get. I don't know if it's a reference to him doing karate, and if it is, why does the pathologist know that? I don't know, I don't get it, but that's what the pathologist said. The pathology report shows that she was also fully aware of what was happening. She knew she was being strangled, she knew it were trying to kill her, so she tried to scream. And as she did so, the marks inside her mouth show that Darren had put his hand over her mouth to conceal her screams. But now, Darren had a major issue. As you remember, he's now only got about an hour left before the surveyor turns up, and he's going to want to look around the house. There's a good chance that he's going to look in every single cupboard. He's going to look all over the house to try and get an actual value of what the house is worth so he can put it against the loan. So Darren decided the best thing he could do was get a body and put it in her car. Her car was a red Mini Countryman car. He drove a short distance away, but not leaving the house in the state. He parked the vehicle and then walked back. As he was getting back to the house, the surveyor saw him walk into the house. For the next 9 hours, Darren continued his day as he'd planned to. The valuer or the surveyor carried out their inspection and then went. When he was later questioned about it, he said that Darren seemed perfectly normal. After he'd left, Darren now had about half an hour before the kids needed picking up from school. He filled this half an hour by going back to Leanne's car. He got in it and he drove around the countryside, which is surrounding this village which they live. Obviously, the reason he's driving about is he's looking for a suitable place to hide a body. But his intention weren't to do it there and then. He only had half an hour and it was daytime. His plan was to come back during the night and dispose of the body then. But first he needed to find a place. He had his phone with him and he had Leanne's phone with him. And this later became used as evidence because obviously in murder investigations these days they look for phone pings to geolocate where people were at what time. And it did show that both of their phones were around Paddock Hill Farm, around Mobberley, Mobberley. They were there for a good few minutes, around 20 to 3 in the afternoon. The CCTV also saw him driving towards the area. Now it's said that murderers quite often bury bodies in places they know or whatever. And he did know this area. The farm that it was at was near a pub. And this pub the family had been to for a meal at some point. And in that area there was a warning sign that warned of deep waters within the woodland. He'd obviously decided that this is where he was going to dump Leanne's body. So after finding the area, he drove back onto the estate, leaving the car on the house and estate but not at their house, walked back to the house, and now it was time to pick the kids up, so he got back in his car, not Leanne's car, and went to pick the kids up. So it's now 3 o'clock, and let's not forget, this is the time that Leanne's supposed to start work. He gets to the school, and then at school he's seen laughing and talking and joking with other parents. Again, acting like there's absolutely nothing the matter whatsoever. When they got home, the son wanted to know where Mum was. So he asked, and Darren just said, "Oh, she's at work." Which is quite an obvious simple lie, because that's where she was expected to be anyway. Darren then carried on as normal. He took the kids to their after school activities, then came home, made them tea and put them to bed. Then later on at 10:30 at night, all the children were in bed, all the children were asleep, and Darren left the house. He left all 3 young children at home in bed alone. At this point, Leanne's body's been in her car boot for over 9 hours. Darren walks back to the red Mini, he gets in it, drives it back to the area near Paddock Hill Farm, and he gets out. But there's a major problem. This deep water that the sign had warned everybody about weren't there. There was no deep water. He had been a bit smarter this time. Knowing of cell tower detection, he left his phone at home. However, he did have Leanne's, and it's not sure whether he was trying to hide Leanne's phone, or maybe he was placing it to make up a story about what happened, or maybe he accidentally dropped it. Either which way, that is where the phone was left. But before he did that, he'd gone through his phone, which was now at home, and Leanne's phone, and deleted all correspondence from that day. So when the police got the phone and looked through the messages and stuff, there was nothing about the argument that they'd had about this fraudulent load application in the phone. It had all been deleted, the calls, the texts, everything. So now, with a lack of deep water, Darren was in the need of another hiding place. So that's what he did. He drove around again, looking for a new place to hide Leanne's body. He eventually dumped Leanne's body at Poynton Lake. The judge speculated that at this time, Darren was losing his nerve a bit. He'd left the kids at home, he'd been gone for a while, he was running out of time, but Either which way, Darren parked up near the lake, as close as he could, dragged out Leanne's body, pulled it 140 yards away along the path, then dumped her body into the lake. She was face down and within reach from the edge. Again, it's speculated that maybe his thoughts at this point were that he were hoping that the time she was found they'd thought she was drowned or she'd been attacked by a random stranger. He then drove her red Mini away from the lake, parked it up somewhere, and then walked 6 miles home with his hood up. However, on his way home at 1:30 in the morning, 2 police officers were on patrol in a car. They saw Darren and they were just looking for burglars, but obviously there's this man with his hood up walking around unexpectedly at 1:30 in the morning. So they pull up outside of him, wind the window down, and kind of say, "Ah, yeah, what you doing? Are you okay?" He kind of says, "Yeah, I'm alright, just on my way home, been for a walk, clear my head, whatever." And he says, "Yeah, alright, well, be on your way, go straight home." Now, I'm not sure at what point he noticed this, but there were blood on his trainers from Leanne. And obviously the police didn't notice this. Now, I have got a bit of information to give you, but there is a trigger warning here, because it's a bit gruesome, to be fair. So if you're a bit squirmish to that, if you don't want to know, it's not terrible, but I still need to put a trigger warning. So you've got 5 seconds. If you look on the timeline, I should have marked where it's safe to start watching again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The blood on his trainers was Leanne's, but he hadn't wounded her in the way that she'd bleed. In fact, the blood had come from her body's natural decomposition, the early stages. As he'd moved and manoeuvred her, blood just absolutely purged from her nose and her mouth. And that's the gruesome bit over. Like I said, if you're watching thinking that weren't that gruesome, I told you it weren't. But if someone's a bit sensitive to that, that is a bit gruesome to imagine. And regardless of how Leanne's blood had got on the trainers, he had to get rid of them as soon as possible. He weren't far from home at this point, and luckily for him, it was bin day the next day. So it's now, 2 a.m? And the bins are out all over the streets. They're going to get collected in a couple of hours. So it's a dead cert that if he puts these shoes in this bin, they'll never be found. They'll eventually be incinerated somewhere. That's it. Evidence gone. So that's what he did. He chucked them in a bin and carried on walking. But very much unfortunately for Darren, as he continued his trip home, now shoeless, just wearing socks, at 2:15 in the morning, the 2 police officers that he'd seen half an hour or so ago were there again. This time, they're even more suspicious, so they pull up alongside him and ask what he's doing. Darren explained that his wife hadn't returned home and he was really worried about her. He thought she might have been in a crash after work or something, so he'd gone out on foot looking for her. The reason he'd gone out on foot looking for her rather than driving is because he'd drank half a bottle of wine and he didn't want to risk it. And then he also said, well, the reason I'm barefoot is because my shoes were hurting my feet, they were rubbing a bit, so I've just chucked them in bin. I weren't that bothered. At this point, the children had been home alone for 4 hours. And obviously on the last chart, the first encounter with Darren gave him as little information as possible. He didn't want them knowing who he were or that he'd been out late at night. But this time he was quite desperate to get them off his back. So he did inform them that, hey guys, I'm a police officer as well. In fact, I'm an inspector. And I do think that was a desperate plea to get their trust a bit. Hey, leave me alone, I'm one of you. Everything's okay, you can trust me. Still suspicious, they decided to take him home. And now after I've thought about this for a bit, this was actually a really clever move. Because obviously, even if everything else he said's a lie, like his name, if he's given a false name, at least now they're going to know where he lives. And if they need to, they can look him up. While at the same time, they've done their duty of making sure he's not up to mischief, they made sure he's okay, and they can talk a little bit further about his missing wife. However, when they got home, one of the children was apparently at the other side of the door, crying. And the police officers noted that Darren appeared very cold, very emotionless, and very unmoved by the fact that he left the child in the house, and when he returned, this child was just stood crying at the door, looking for his dad. Darren was still trying to play the caring, innocent husband that were anxious and very panicked about his wife's well-being. But again, the police officers are looking at him going, well, you seem really relaxed and composed. There's something not quite making sense here. But on with the investigation, the police say, hey, we want you to phone her. Do that now, and maybe she'll answer, everything will be alright, we can go back to burglars. So he did. Obviously Leanne didn't answer, so then he left her a voice message. The police then went, okay, well we're going to go make some inquiries, we'll have a look, see if we can find a car, and they left the house. And it's worth noting here that since he'd killed Leanne about 13 hours ago, he'd sent her 5 messages to her mobile. And obviously the reason he's done that is so if anyone says, hey, we think you've done it, like, no, I've been messaging her, seeing if she's okay. One of the messages that he sent her was sent about an hour before he went out to hide her body. That text message read, "Hi hun, your dad texted me. They've not heard from you. You okay? Bit worried now. Kiss kiss." Soon after the police had left, Darren took off his clothes. He put them in the washing machine, put them on a cleaning cycle, and then went off up to bed. Obviously, the entire washing machine thing was to remove any further incriminating evidence from his clothes. However, about 2 hours later at 4 a.m, the same 2 police knocked on the door. They said, "Hey, have you got that Where's My Phone Apple app thing where you can locate somebody if you're worried about them, or locate the phone if you've lost it?" And he says, yeah, sure. They said, "Well, why don't you give that a try?" Luckily for us, or unluckily for Darren, the phone still had 5%, which were plenty enough to get a signal and send, "Hi guys, I'm here." And unbeknown to Darren, not much longer before this, half an hour, 15 minutes before, Leanne's body had been found by somebody walking. I mean, there is literally no chance of this body being found as soon as it was. It was found about 2:45 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. This guy, I think he just got off a bus from Manchester or something, and he was walking home. He took the wrong direction, he was a bit lost and confused. He saw Leanne's body and obviously panicked massively. Just imagine being in that situation. So he ran off scared and panicked and stuff, and then obviously he'd phoned the police and was like, "I'm sure I've just found a dead body." So the chances of that happening were purely circumstantial. It really shouldn't have happened, but it did. Now, I'm not quite sure if I've got the timings right here, but I think I have, apart from the washing machine doesn't match up. So the washing machine timing might be a little bit off from my version of events. But either which way, the police had gone back out, and the radio call had come through from the head radio centre place, I don't know, dispatch box, whatever. And that had said that, "Hey guys, we've found a body, we need some officers to respond." Now, obviously, these 2 officers that have been dealing with Darren and now trying to find a trace of Leanne went straight back to the house. They turned off the washing machine and removed the clothes and arrested Darren Mckie. He was in his dressing gown and he was arrested at 5 a.m, about 17 hours after he'd killed his wife. The arresting officers did note that even during the arrest, Darren Mckie stayed calm and collected. What followed was hours after hours worth of interviews, through which Darren lied profusely. Obviously, he denied that he had any knowledge of Leanne's death whatsoever. And as more and more incriminating evidence were being passed to Darren's solicitor, Darren changed tactics and just started saying no comment. Even when the case got to the Crown Court, he still protested his innocence, denying any responsibility whatsoever. He even put in a defence statement which had changed from his original interviews. In this statement, he claimed that Leanne was at home when he got there. They'd argued and then they'd both drove off in Leanne's red Mini. But then he left her and went back home to meet the surveyor. But Leanne didn't want anything to do with that because she just didn't want anything to do with a financial mess. And I'm sure if you got a specialist, that statement alone would say that there's a lot of things portrayed just in that statement. But I'm not a specialist, so I'm not going to talk about them. His defence statement then continued that he hadn't seen her since that time. He left her in the car, went back home, that were it, he didn't see her again. He kept this up all the way through the court until they got to a point where it was so painfully obvious that they had that much evidence against him, there was no way he was going to get away with it. The evidence was too heavily, overwhelmingly stacked against him. Then he changed his stance, but he still weren't pleading guilty to murder. He now asked for the opportunity to plead guilty for manslaughter again. This left the jury only having to deal with the issue of intent, and he didn't have to be cross-examined. In sentencing, the judge said,
"I do not add to your sentence for your not guilty plea to murder and the shameful way in which you have conducted yourself, lying to your family and friends in maintaining the deceit that you were an innocent man. However, it means that there can be no credit at all for your late acknowledgement of responsibility for the killing. You have expressed no remorse."
There were a pinnacle moment for the judge when he was looking at the minimum starting sentence, and he looked at everything and he talked everything through, and if the murder was done for gain, it would have been a 30-year start. But the judge ultimately said that he didn't think it was for gain, so that put the starting block at 15 years. He said he couldn't be certain that when Darren set off from work, he had the intent to kill Leanne. However, he did say that during the time that he was choking and holding Leanne's mouth, that he must have been able to see Leanne's life ebbing away from her. And therefore, he definitely did intend to kill her, or at least do serious harm. With them two things considered, the minimum starting block was 15 years. However, the judge also took in a few aggravating factors. There was the deliberate, determined concealment of the body, which he said is made even worse at the fact that he's a senior police officer and he was using his knowledge to do so. He factored in the mental and physical suffering that Leanne must have endured before her death. He factored in how Darren had tried to cover up what he'd done by sending them messages and stuff and being super deceitful. And although it wasn't done for gain, he did factor in that there were a slight background of that. The murder, again, like I said, it weren't done for gain, but it were done to cover up fraud and computer misuse, both of which are prison sentences of their own. Pretty much the only mitigating factor on Darren's side was that there was no evidence that it were premeditated. Not only was there no evidence, the prosecution, the defence, nobody had ever suggested that it were premeditated. Darren Mckie was sentenced to a minimum of 19 years, 179 days. Now, that is all I've got for this episode. And as you know, I find it hard to finish stories like this, and if I can find anything that'll help anybody, I like to put it in. I find it really hard to skip that bit. And there's one thing that bellows in my head as I've been writing this and as I've been telling you this, and it's that don't get into debt. That sounds super obvious and super clear, especially if you're not on so much money. But don't do it. See, the problem is, in my opinion, and I don't mean any offence to anybody when I say this, because I've done it, I'm fair enough sure everyone's done it. The problem is, we think we need things. For example, a dryer, a clothes dryer, or a TV. So, and we ain't got any money, so we're more likely to go and get it on a loan, or some one of these like payday companies that charge an extortionate amount of interest. And it's just daylight robbery and it's theft. But we do that because we want it now. When in reality is we should save up for it. Because, especially them payday things, geez, the amount of money you pay on that, you pay £1,000 for a £300 TV type thing. That's not beneficial for you or anybody else. That's just ridiculous. Go without. And as I said before, I'm not saying that... What I'm trying to say is it's alright if you haven't got any money. That's understandable. But even if you haven't got any money, getting into debt should be the last resort. The entire economic system that we live in, especially in this day and age, is built on debt. That is how the economy runs so strong, or it did until we're into this mess. And it's also the downfall of the economy. But the problem is, we're told that we need debt, we should get this now. Here's a loan, we'll give you a loan. That's not your money. And there is a price to that. You do have to pay interest. Even if it's interest free, it's not interest free forever. Nothing's free. My advice to you is if you haven't been in debt before, if you're younger than 18, I don't think... Whatever. Don't get into debt. Because it really is a vicious cycle that they profit off you. And this does happen. People commit the suicide word that I didn't want to say because of the channel. But people do that. And as we've seen, people murder because of money. Do not let yourself fall into debt. Obviously, there's times that we can't avoid it. But really do research every avenue before you do that. And if you have got debt, I'll try and bang some useful links in the description for help in the UK if you're in debt. I'll try again for the countries that I've got viewers in. But obviously I'm not in them countries, so my advice is not going to be that good. If you are in debt, find help. There is always a way out. And at the very end of this, at the very top of this, it's just money, guys. It is just money. We look at this, and like I said, you're going to look at me now and say, you know, it's easy to say when you got some. I ain't got any money. I run a small business. I ain't got money. I've got lots of kids. I haven't got money. I've got financial difficulties of my own. The problem is, it is just money, and we get lost into that. And don't get me wrong, if you've got bailiffs knocking on the door, it's not just money. But at the very core of it, when you want that TV a bit earlier, or when you... Like I said, I'm not saying if you fall into debt, it's your fault. maybe you need a loan to get a car, and that car is going to get you a job, so therefore you need that car. I'm not criminalising being in debt. If I'm criminalising anything, it's for debt companies. I'm not criminalising that. All I'm saying is, if there is another way, even if the other way is waiting, try and do that other way, because it can very, very easily spiral out of control. And that's all that's happened here. Two people that didn't quite watch, mainly Darren to be fair I think, but didn't quite watch his spending, has let it take over his life. It's ruined his life, it's ruined his kid's life, and it's killed his wife. And probably the judge speculated the only reason he was doing that was to keep his wife happy, keep his wife comfortable, in fear of losing her. But, well, what were it worth, you know? It's just money. If you ain't got any, join the club. Most of us aren't. Don't try and keep up with the Joneses. Because the reality of it is as well, in this social media day where we look at everybody else that's got everything, chances are your neighbour that's got a brand new car, it's either a company car or it's on finance. He's in debt. You know? The person that's got nothing, including no debt, is probably the happiest person. Again, just a final cap that off, I am not judging you if you are in debt. Do not take that the wrong way. If you are in debt, I'm sure you can agree with me and help the other people that aren't in debt stay out of debt by saying, debt is not the way forward. I'm sorry for my moral rants. It weren't a moral rant. If you want to get in debt, you do so. Till next week, guys. Goodbye.